welcome back to Feeling Full and Finally Free, a caregiver's healing journey. I'm Jeanette Yates, and today we'll explore how setting healthy boundaries can help caregivers make better, more confident decisions. I recently sent out a newsletter sharing some recent personal experiences and my strategies for making difficult caregiving decisions during those difficult experiences. And the response was incredibly positive. Many of you who were on my newsletter replied back expressing how helpful it was and encouraging. So I wanted to hop on here today. And first of all, thank you for that feedback. I always love hearing from those of you who receive my newsletter and hearing what's going on in your caregiving and self-care journey, as well as hearing how any insight I gave you encouraged or helped you in any way. But this also made me realize that this is an important topic for us to explore a little bit further, which is why we are diving into more of that topic today. Last week, we talked about boundaries on the podcast, but we're going to go, so this is going to be like how I used boundaries and made better decisions or made confident decisions during this week of somewhat intense caregiving and life, because as most of us know, caregiving is just part of what we do. We also probably have a job, a family, other responsibilities. And so we don't just make decisions in caregiving, we make decisions everywhere. And so the weight of all those decisions, especially the caregiving ones, is something that we're going to talk about today, and also how to feel free of that weight. So as I mentioned in my newsletter, like many weeks before in my life, I found myself facing a heavy responsibility of making medical decisions for my mother. She was in ICU and septic and in need of emergency surgery. And like I mentioned, this is not the first time we've been there in that exact same ICU, septic, etc. And so this is something I'm familiar with, and navigating the medical jargon, the signing of the consents, and weighing all the potential life-saving yet risky options, all of that can be very overwhelming. It is always sobering and immensely stressful to make these decisions. And so even though I have been there before, it's not like it's so easy that I don't understand the weight of the decisions I'm making. And so in addition to these critical healthcare decisions in the last week, I also had to make big decisions about my business, some of my parenting stuff that's going on, and some of the my personal, physical, and emotional well-being. So I had big decisions for caregiving, big decisions for business, parenting, etc. And there was a time when the weight of all of these decisions would have completely sidelined me. I used to, in the height of my burnout, I would almost completely shut down. So I would do what I needed to do as a caregiver, and I would completely shut down after that. Everything else was either deferred, delayed, or delegated to someone else, or just the decision didn't get made at all. And so that's the way I used to react and interact with a crisis, especially a medical crisis for my mom, which again happens fairly regularly and has so for the last several years. So I used to be consumed with anxiety about making the right choice and the guilt that would follow each option. Was my decision too much or not enough? What would people think about the choices I had made for my mother? Will any of it even make a difference in the end? These are all things that would run through my head constantly. And then of course, again, that's how it would happen in my caregiving, but I would struggle with these same kind of questions in my own parenting, in my job. Was I doing too much, not enough? What will people think of my choices? And will it make a difference in the end? So across the board, those thoughts were running through my head all the time about caregiving, about parenting, about my own health, about my marriage, about all the things going on, right? which can be very exhausting because I don't know if you know this, but thinking actually burns calories. So if you're doing thinking and ruminating, overthinking, obsessive thinking all the time, it can actually cause more and more of that exhaustion that we all are trying to get rid of. However, things have changed. That is not how it works now whenever I'm in these crisis situations with my mother. I knew that I could not keep doing the same thing I was doing because I was going to burn out, like burn to the ground. I went through a process of getting therapy, infusing self-care into my daily life, all of these things in order to climb out of the burnout. But one of the things that I had to do was approach these big decisions, these big circumstances differently. So this week was different. It's a perfect example for me to share with you how all of this stuff works together. So as I approached the decisions this week, I did it without expecting perfection for myself, knowing that despite making the best choices, some outcomes were beyond my control. I've learned that to accept that I am not in control of my mom's life or when it ends or how long it lasts. And the same is true for many aspects of life, including caregiving. So while I make the best decisions I can at the time, I don't always have control over what I wish I had control over. Now, let's talk about how this decision making and the ability to do so with confidence interweaves with boundaries. Okay. So how did I get to the point of making decisions with confidence and peace? The answer lies in setting healthy boundaries. So in order for me to take control of my life, take control of my schedule, actually have the time to go to therapy, have the time to do self-care, have the time to learn about myself and where I lacked boundaries, I needed to start with a boundary, which is ironic because you're like, well, if I had a boundary, I wouldn't need to learn more about how I needed to set healthy boundaries. But you have to start somewhere. And so I started with setting one boundary and then was able to create a pattern of healthy boundary setting. And they also are something that, well, we'll get into that later. Let's keep focused. So in order for me to be making decisions with confidence and peace, I had to start setting healthy boundaries. Boundaries bring the clarity and reduce the stress associated with decision making. They allow you to focus on what's within your control and let go of the rest. This is something that I found so helpful to me, was having the mental space, sometimes physical space, to allow me to see the situation for what it was, figure out where I had control or had agency, make decisions effectively, and then let go of the rest. This was key for me to be able to live with that peace, that full understanding of how I can make decisions. My decisions don't define who I am. I can do the best I can and let go of the rest. This helped me be able to move through my life without constantly second guessing myself, constantly having all of those thoughts run through my head. Is it too much? Not enough? What will other people say? And will it make a difference anyway? This week, I made decisions knowing that they were the best for the moment, that particular moment. I didn't allow guilt or worry to overshadow the process, and I maintained boundaries that protected my mental and emotional well-being, and it felt liberating. Freeing, totally free, finally free. Understanding that yes, these decisions were life-saving, but also very risky. I understood that, but I also didn't let that keep me from being able to make the decision. I had to separate my worth from the decision. My worth is not in the decision. My worth is in something bigger and something broader, and my job is to just show up with as much presence as I can bring the best of who I am, then make decisions in that moment, the one that is best for that moment. Now, we're going to go through the steps of setting boundaries. If you listen to last week's episode, this is going to sound familiar, but this is just how it works. So I want to make sure that you are aware of these steps that I use, and we'll talk a little bit about specifically how it worked for me this week. So the first step is to have some self-awareness. You're going to assess your physical symptoms. Are in this crisis situation, how am I doing physically and emotionally from the get-go? Once we do that, we can see where we might have gone over our capacity for too long. We might need to step back. Now, in my case, the crisis hit fairly quickly. I was well rested, was calm, emotionally centered, grounded. And so I didn't feel like I had any issue with boundaries in that moment, but I still did do the assessment. How are you feeling? What's going on? What's your capacity today? And so just a question to you, if you're watching on YouTube, you can drop this in the comments. If you're listening, go head over to YouTube and drop the answer to these questions in the comments. But when you're thinking about being able to be present during those stressful, hard decision moments, potentially caregiving crises, or maybe parenting crisis or job crisis, right? We have them everywhere. They're not just pigeonholed to caregiving. Where do you see boundary areas are hardest for you? Maybe you're great at setting boundaries at work, but you're not great at setting boundaries with your kids or in your caregiving. I can relate. I was just talking to my husband last night about some boundaries with our kids and where they need to be or how they need to shift and move. So I get it. But try to identify where you're struggling with boundaries. Even if it's everywhere, don't panic. There's hope. We can get you some boundaries. But just having that self-awareness, check in with yourself, your physical feelings, your physical health, and then your emotions. How are you feeling? Are you too tired? Are you hungry? Are your emotions too all over the place? Assess where you are. And then if things are feeling really out of control, one of the first boundaries you can set here is to take some time, which can be hard when the doctors are in your face telling you have to make a decision, you have to make a decision. You can ask for time. You can ask for clarity. You can ask for all of those things, but take a moment and get yourself grounded in the present moment. If you struggle with that, I do have a resource for you that can help you stay grounded when the bottom falls out. Go ahead and head to the show notes. I've got a couple of things for you there. Be sure that once you've assessed once you become aware of what's going on inside you during that crisis moment, go ahead and take a moment to get yourself grounded, okay? Go ahead and if you're tired and you're like, well, I don't have time to take a nap, it's okay to take a few deep breaths. It's okay to stay grounded, get grounded, and then move forward. Now, the second step to boundary setting in general is self-advocacy. And this is one of those things that interplays with decision-making, especially for me in this particular week. One of the boundaries I have had to set for myself when my mom goes into the hospital, which is very often, is that I can't just camp out there. I can't just stay there 24/7. I have to go home and get some rest. So that's part of that self-awareness. I have to touch base with my family. I usually have to do some work, some of which I can do while I'm sitting there, but some I have to do on my own. And then, so that self-awareness piece allows me to see where I need a boundary, which is I'm not going to stay here 24/7. And then the self-advocacy piece is really just advocating for that space, advocating for myself leaving. And sometimes that means you can just leave. You don't have to have somebody relieve you and come sit there. In my case, my mom's situation was precarious, but not in a way that I couldn't step out, and do the things I needed to do and come back, or that I couldn't be in touch with everybody. This is where you kind of have to just know what's going on and, be present when the doctors are talking to you so you can hear this, how much time do we have? what's going on, what's the extent of this crisis situation, they will let you know if it's okay for you to leave. And if they say to you, it's okay to go, it is really okay to go. If they feel like they need you there to make decisions in a particular time frame, the doctors and the staff will let you know that. And they will also let you know, we can do this over the phone, or we have to have you here in person. So to advocate for yourself, you want to figure out what you need. In my case, I knew I needed rest time and then time to connect with other parts of my life, like my family. I was able to be with my mom during those times where timely decisions were necessary, where things were happening really quickly. I was there, I was present. And then when that crisis, that mini crisis within the crisis was over, I was able to step away knowing that she was well taken care of, she was covered. I had communicated what I needed to communicate, made the decisions I needed to make, and then I could step away. I could let the rest go, right? So if you feel like during a crisis time, one of the boundaries you need is, I need to go home and get some sleep. It is okay to do that. I also have another episode that I did with an ICU nurse who talked a little bit about this. I'll be sure to link that in the show notes as well, because that's something we're like, are you sure we can leave? Because I feel like I can't. But in this situation with me this week, there were times that I could not leave and there were times that I could. So I didn't just camp out there 24/7 the whole time she was there, but I made decisions in the present moment, which is what we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Now, another part of boundaries and decision making is that you have to put it into practice, the self-assertion piece, where you are actually doing the thing that you said you're going to do. So this is about consistency. This is about being able to put your plan into action and then react accordingly if something changes. That's one of the things with caregiving. We have to be pretty nimble. And the way we stay nimble is being well rested, nourished, hydrated, and then connected with life outside of caregiving. When you set a boundary, so for this week, I did, like I said, I did some self-awareness, what's going on with me, and then of course awareness of what's going on with my mother, obviously. And then I did some advocacy of, I can stay here at this time, but I need to leave at this time. Some of that worked. And then when I couldn't leave, I adjusted my plans accordingly. So that's that nimble piece where it was like, okay, well, I'm going to shift some things around. And so I was able to do that with no guilt. So that's another thing that happens here when we start getting into practice with our boundaries. We become able to do the things we need to take care of ourselves, which makes us more confident when we have to adjust. So I hear from a lot of caregivers all the time. They feel really guilty when they're not doing the caregiving, or, when they're not doing the caregiving, or when they're doing the caregiving and they have to readjust something else, cancel an appointment, reschedule an appointment. They feel guilty about that. So there's guilt coming up from everywhere, right? But when we have taken care of ourselves, when we have more confidence in our boundaries and decision making, then we know, I am going to have to change my schedule, and I don't need to apologize for this. Now, maybe you say, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. I mean, that's not the same as feeling guilty, right? That's just courtesy. But we don't have to carry the weight of like, oh, what must they think of me, right? That whole, did I do that too much or not enough? What will other people think? So I cancel this appointment. What will they think of me? And then will it make a difference, right? We don't have to keep playing that over and over again. So when we practice boundaries, we want consistency, but we also need the understanding that boundaries are flexible. I talked about that in last week's episode, where it's not a wall, so I'm not saying when my mom's in the hospital, I'm not going to go up there ever, or I'm never going to spend the night. I'm just saying I'm not going to stay there 24/7. Okay. So the boundary has to be flexible enough and adjust according to the current circumstance, but the circumstances change in every day. Sometimes you're needed in multiple places, and it's okay. This is probably one of the most important things I want to say. It would be great if we had one crisis well, it would be great if we had no crises, but assuming, we live in this world, there's going to be a crisis. It would be great if we could have a crisis in caregiving, or a crisis at work, or a crisis with our parenting or in our family. However, it usually is all of those things all the time. We have to choose where we can make the most difference. That involves that self-awareness, and that involves self-assertion, in the sense that we have to say, there's a lot of people that are pulling for me, that are needing me right now. Where does my presence make the most difference? Where can my presence actually change what's happening? And oftentimes, I can't say it happens this way every time. Sometimes it is just what it is. Sometimes there are ways that we can delegate, delete, and dive in. So sometimes we can delegate a decision to someone else, or delegate a responsibility to someone else. Sometimes we are involved in something we don't even need to be involved in. We're just sucked into the crisis because it's our family and we're just sucked in. And then other times it's like, no, this is where I need to really dive in. So we need to be able to decide that. And again, if we've set boundaries in our life and we are rested, nourished, connected with other people, and hydrated, this will be easier to do. So, that's another thing that is really important, going back to that idea of like, make the best decision you can at the time. You may, even if it was one of those like Groundhog Day situations, and the next day you had to make the same decision again, you might make a different decision. It doesn't mean that the decision you made the day before was the wrong decision. You made the best decision you could at the time, and then you're going to let the rest go. So speaking of letting the rest go, let's talk about letting go of that guilt and worry, because I was in the middle of that this week, where I had to make a very important decision about a surgery that my mom needed. There was this option and that option, or we could do option C, whatever. And so it was very, there was a lot of pros and cons, and talking to this doctor and then having to talk to this other doctor who knew more about this other thing. So it was a lot going on, and I was able to make a decision not thinking it was the perfect decision. It's important to understand that making the best choice doesn't mean it has to be the perfect choice, or that you have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, even if you make, quote, perfect decisions, that doesn't make you perfect or not perfect. Your decisions do not define who you are. And so this idea of being able to make a good choice, the best choice for the moment, and letting the rest go, reminded me, as I was standing there in the ER, or not the ER, in the ICU with my mom. She was not standing. She was in the bed, and trying to make these decisions for her. It reminded me of something that comes to my mind so often in my caregiving experience, my parenting experience, and all the relationships I have in my life. But I used to volunteer for a nonprofit organization that served people in various stages of eating disorder recovery. I was a mentor. I actually was the coordinator for all the mentors in their mentoring and mentee program. And I was on the board. And so I was heavily involved in this community. And a fellow board member and I were also community support group leaders. So we led a support group for people in various stages of eating disorder recovery. And one of the things that she used to always say, and it would comfort me every time, and the people that were coming to the support groups always loved hearing it. And even to this day, we share this with each other back and forth when they're having a hard time. She says, when you go to bed every night and you put your head on the pillow, if you say, I did the best I could for today, even if it wasn't as good as yesterday, but it was the best I could do today, then I've done enough. You still have given your best. Even if you're not at your best, whatever you are today, if you give that is enough. That is your best for today, and that is enough. This wisdom and this insight is something I bring into my caregiving, especially in these decisions. I try to remember that when I make decisions, I can trust that I'm doing my best at that moment. And I let go of the guilt or I let go of the guilt and worry about whether or not it's the perfect choice. I let go of that because it's the best choice I can make for right now with the information I have and the bandwidth I have for that moment. When you make decisions, trust that you are doing your best you can at that moment. Let go of the guilt and worry about whether or not it's the perfect choice, and focus on doing your best in that moment and let go of the rest. Okay? That's so, so important. And of course, the more boundaries we set, the more we practice that self-care, the more we, and you guys know by now, if you've been listening, when I'm talking about self-care, I love all the pretty stuff, but I'm really talking about tending to that mind, body, spirit. Okay. The more we are incorporating our needs into our daily lives, we are getting the rest we need. We are getting the nutrients we need. We are getting the connection with the outside world that we need. Our best is going to be pretty darn good. We're not going to be at the end of the rope all the time. And it's so important to know that. All right. So as we just started talking about, we're going to keep talking about the self-care piece for a few more minutes. Self-care is the foundation for the better decision making. Like I've been weaving into this whole episode, self-care is how you are going to make better decisions for your loved one, for yourself, for your children, for your job, in your relationships. Okay. When you are well rested, nourished, connected to your higher power, and present in the moment, you'll feel more confident and at peace with your choices. The end. Period. Not the end. We're going to keep going. All right. Here are some aspects of self-care to prioritize. When we think about self-care, a lot of people, we all have different things that pop up in our head. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to a financial caregiver actually about her experience, and she talked about how she hates the term self-care because it's been taken to mean more superficial things. But when I talk about self-care, like I said, we're getting down and dirty. We're getting into our mind, body, spirit. So here are some aspects of self-care that I suggest you prioritize. Take what you need and leave the rest. So of course, speaking of rest, it is my favorite form of self-care. Please prioritize rest, getting adequate sleep. So there's a difference between just having a restful day and getting enough sleep. Both are important. Please, please, please get enough sleep. It is something that affects your entire body and your mind. If you are not sleeping enough, you continue to get more and more into a deficit of sleep. Then you're running on sleep deprivation, and that causes so many problems to your physical health and your emotional health and your ability to make decisions. So I also advocate eating nutritious meals and staying hydrated. Now, again, nutrition, what is nutritious for me might be slightly different than you. So I don't give diet advice, but figure out what your body needs for food. And again, if you want some resources, I've got some of those too. Figure out what is necessary and good for you. Remember to stay hydrated. Please drink anything that you want to drink, but drink enough water, okay? Don't fool yourself into thinking other things count. Water, 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 and then you can add all the fun stuff. I do, certainly. I have coffee right here with me right now. But remember, give your body what it needs. First, sleep, nutrition, and then engage in activities that bring you joy and peace. So I love the concept of mindful movement and intentional movement in every day. A lot of people get overwhelmed by the idea of exercising. I love exercise. And even in this season of my life, I have pulled back on strenuous exercise because my body needs more mindful movement, more peaceful movement. I do love the high intensity stuff too. If that brings you joy, knock yourself out. If it doesn't, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. But find activities that bring you joy and peace. A lot of the caregivers I work with, they have some sort of artistic or creative outlet, painting, singing, writing, gardening, all of these things. And they find that those activities bring them joy and peace. All right. And then the other thing I suggest is connect with supportive friends and communities. And if you need a community to connect with, please come join us in the Self-Caregiver community. We have got a lot of stuff coming up. This summer, we're kind of taking it easy. We're doing a little book club. If you want to join that, but we're really just taking it easy. But in the fall, I've got a lot of great things that will help support you in your self-care, in your healing, in your own journey. If you're sitting here listening right now and you're like, I do not have any supportive friends, nobody understands what I'm going through, or my friends are supportive, but they don't get it, this community is for you. And again, I will link that in the show notes. Okay, so I'm going to run through those really quickly. Prioritize these aspects of self-care: rest and relaxation, nutrition and hydration, activities that bring you joy and peace, and connecting with supportive friends and communities. Now, here's the deal with self-care. If you skip these and go straight to the more external forms of self-care and temporary fixes, they won't fix anything. You've got to go to those basics first, and then please, by all means, add on all you want. But you've got to get to those basic needs first. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, it is the physiological needs of food, shelter, water, sleep, and breathing, by the way. Food, shelter, water, sleep, and breathing. Now, I mention this because we often take for granted all of these things. We want to go straight to I want something that makes me feel good right now. Massage, pedicure, facial. Again, love all those things, do them all the time. But they do not work for fulfilling those physiological needs. You've got to get those handled first. So be sure to do that. Because again, all of that goes back. You're like, wait, are we talking about self-care or talking about decision-making? Yes, because self-care is the foundation of decision-making. Self-care is part of boundary setting. All this stuff is connected, you guys. That's why I kind of talk about it all together all the time. One time I was speaking to one of the caregivers I work with, and I think this was like a week or so ago, and she mentioned how when she first started working with me, we do a lot of mindfulness and self-awareness with caregivers in my program. She noticed how often she was walking around holding her breath. She was just holding her breath, and she didn't even know until she started paying attention to her breath. So breath, water, food, shelter, sleep, these self-care needs must be met for you to begin building the safety, belonging, self-esteem needed for confidence and decision-making in your caregiving and in your life. So that's how this is all connected, because when you get those needs met, then you're able to be present in the moment, make the good decisions, set the boundaries when you need. Boom, burnout, gone, right? That's how it works in a nutshell. All right, so before we continue and wrap this up, I do want to take a moment to make note that any advice and insights that I share in this podcast are based on my own personal experience and my own personal study. I am not a professional therapist. I should not, none of the stuff that I tell you should be taken as a replacement for professional therapy or as a diagnostic tool. Always seek the guidance of a qualified mental health professional for any concerns or issues you may be facing. And of course, I always advocate, please go see your doctor as well. All right. Just making sure I get that out there today. Remember, you will have to make hard decisions and tough choices. That's just part of life. But guess what? The good news is you can do it. You can make the hard decisions. You can have the hard conversations, and you can make the tough choices. Healthy boundaries provide the clarity and confidence you need to navigate these changes. It also provides the space you need for self-care, which is really what brings you the confidence to navigate the changes. If you made the best decision you could at the time, even if you might have made a different choice on another day, you still made your best choice. And before we wrap up, there's still time to join our summer book club. I mentioned it a few minutes ago. We just started last week, but it's not too late to join us. We're reading Melody Beattie's The New Codependency. Reading this book with us is a fantastic opportunity to dive deeper into healthy boundary setting and the importance of self-care with fellow caregivers. So listen, if you're like, what is codependency? That's what the book tells you. But I'm telling you, it talks about healthy boundary setting and self-care all throughout the book. So we're going to be taking the information in there and relating it to our caregiving situations where applicable, and we're going to learn a little bit about ourselves in the process. For more information and to sign up for the summer book club, just head to my Instagram. You can check me out there at the self caregiver. You can also check the show notes. I'll have the link there as well. But like I said, you're not too late. You're right on time. Come join us. Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned for more episodes of Feeling Full and Finally Free. Take care. And remember, you are worthy of living a full life, finally guilt-free.